Back in 2015, pretty much the biggest YouTube bodybuilding star at that time, Louis Marco Baby Please started to make a lot of videos discussing the bubble gut phenomenon in modern day bodybuilding. Now, if you guys do not know what the bubble gut phenomenon is, it is basically bodybuilders on stage walking around absolutely shredded to the bone, still having a gut somehow. And pretty much him, along with a lot of bodybuilding fans, started to call for a new division that was something in between modern day bodybuilding and men's physique. Basically, you would have aesthetic bodybuilders pretty much pose against each other. So it was basically just like bodybuilding, but aesthetic. But moving on, back in that time, even Mr. Olympia Phil Heath had a bubble gut. Kai Green, the runner-up, he also had a bubble gut from time to time, and he wasn't much better prior to Phil Heath's reign. You had Dorian Yates and Ronnie Coleman, both had a bubble gut later on in their career. Jay Cutler, he was pretty much the only exception, but Jay Cutler was still a mass monster, and you could argue that he was somewhat aesthetic, but he wasn't really that aesthetic as pretty much guys in the 80s and the 70s. Now, during the 90s, you obviously had guys like Kevin Levrone and Sean Ray, who I guess a lot of people would still argue that they were too big to be aesthetic, but in my opinion, they were sufficiently aesthetic enough and they were not that huge. I guess you could classify them as mass monster, but I tend to disagree. I do not think that they fall into the categories of what a mass monster is. But in the modern day era, with the exception of this man right here, you pretty much had no aesthetic bodybuilding placing at the top of shows or near the top. And even Cedric McMillan, he could definitely be classified as a mass monster. In my opinion, he is bigger than both Kevin Levrone and Sean Ray, so therefore he is also less aesthetic than them. Therefore, moving on, people pretty much wanted to have a bodybuilding division where physiques like this man right here, this is the amazing aesthetic Bob Paris, were the norm. Pretty much something in between bodybuilding and men's physique, or bodybuilding as in mass monster bodybuilding and men's physique, something in between those two. Because men's physique guys, they were pretty much too small and they did not hit the poses. Bodybuilding guys, they were too huge and they were unaesthetic. But imagine a division of aesthetic bodybuilders competing against each other, actually hitting poses and being compared. Well, that is how you pretty much had the birth of the class physique division in 2016. But during their first years, the class physique division was sadly not that exciting. As you can see from this picture, it looks pretty much like bodybuilders that are short and stocky in boxers, I guess you could say. They also had some weird posing trunks back in the day. None of these guys are in particular that aesthetic except for one guy. I won't even mention who that is. I think that you guys all see him. So that is pretty much the reason why bodybuilding or the classic physique division did not have that much hype during the first years of its conception. But if we move on, I want to take a look at how pretty much the classic physique division has evolved by looking at the top 5 from the 2016 Mr. Olympia, the class physique division, of course, comparing that to the top 5 at 2021 Mr. Olympia. And right off the bat, you have Darren Charles on the left. Now, this guy, I do not know how he did so well during the first years of the class physique division, or at least in the very first year. He actually even beat Terence Ruffin and Chris Bumstead at a show. And no, I am not joking. I will show later on how Chris Bumstead looked at that time. There is no way Darren Charles was touching him in any way. But you can see that pretty much during the conception of the class physique division, bodybuilding standards, and by that I mean open bodybuilding standards, were still imposed even in classic physique. As you can see from Ramon, the structural differences are absolutely amazing. Now, I wouldn't say that Darren Charles is particularly narrow, but I would not say that about his waistline either, which is quite wide. But they did not really care about that during the first years of the classic physique division. Meanwhile, now they absolutely do, which I think is a great thing. But let us move on. This man right here is Robert Timms, aka Mr. Classic Physique himself, as he likes to call himself. This man actually placed sixth at the 2016 Classic Physique Olympia behind Darren Charles. And as you can see, when it comes to pure bodybuilding standards, I guess you could say that Darren Charles is better than this guy. But by classic physique standards, at least today's standards, it is not even close. This man is absolutely smoking Darren Charles. But this just shows how the classic physique standards have evolved and how they have most part evolved for the better, because this guy should have actually placed ahead of Darren Charles. But if we move on to the fourth spot, here we have a guy that many of you probably still recognize, none other than Brian Ansley. And we have 2021 Mr. Olympia fourth place finisher, Urs Kalzinski. Now, as I will show later on, because obviously Brian Ansley still competes till this day, still placing very high, you can also see that even the posing has changed, because yeah, Urs Kalzinski still has a naturally smaller waistline than Brian Ansley, but I wouldn't say that the difference is that huge. But back in the day, most guys would just hit regular bodybuilding shots, and Brian Ansley actually also came from the 212 division, so he's probably quite used to that. But overall, I would say that Brian Ansley was still a bit robbed at the 2016 Mr. Olympia, because, in my opinion, he was better than some guys who placed ahead of him. But it is what it is, and also from the back, obviously, he was absolutely amazing. Still crushing the 2021 version of Urs Kodzinski, but that is a whole nother topic. But then we move on to the third place finisher, and here I have no idea how Sadiq Hadzovic on the left placed that high, but this one right here does not really showcase the evolution, I guess, of the class physique division, because Brian Ansley is probably one of the most, I guess you could say, non-classic looking classic physique competitors of the modern day era. He does have a good structure, and I think that a lot of people are pretty much making it worse than it actually is. But you can pretty much see the evolution of posing. Sadiq Hadzovic, he would actually pose in a pretty aesthetic manner even back in the day. But if you compare how Mr. Brian Ansley posed in 2016 to how he poses today in 2021, you can pretty much see that it makes a major difference. His structure looks a lot better. He has much more of a V-taper, so on and so forth. Obviously, Brian Ansley is much better than Sadiq Hadzovic. In my opinion, he was also better in 2016. I don't know how Sadiq plays ahead of him, but there is that. It might have something to do with politics, because Sadiq was a very popular guy on social media, and he still is for that matter. But let us move on. This man right here, this was the second place finisher at the 2016 Mr. Olympia for the class physique division. And as you can see, this guy is quite an amazing bodybuilder. He has very good lines, and you can even say that he is indeed aesthetic. From the back, by the way, he also has a great back, especially his lower back, absolutely amazing. But as I said, you can pretty much say that he's aesthetic, but compared to modern day classic physique guys, he just does not have that classic physique look, because as you can see, his waist is not the slimmest, guys, not the slimmest. I would also criticize him for having sort of weak-ish arms, but in comparison to modern day classic physique competitors, I won't even get at that, guys. That is a whole nother topic for a whole another day. But again, guys, a lot of class physique competitors back in 2016, they were pretty much decent. But again, guys, they look like sort of downsized aesthetic bodybuilders, if that makes any sense. They did not have a bubble gut for the most part. But still, guys, there wasn't a huge separation between these guys and 212/open bodybuilders, except for size, of course, because of the weight restrictions that they were under. But moving on, if you compare them to today's runner-up, or the 2021 Mr. Olympia runner-up, you can clearly see that not even in when it comes to the structure, but also when it comes to the way that they pose, it is just a lot different. And you can see that Terence Ruffin, he is clearly separated from open bodybuilders and 212 guys, especially because of that tiny midsection and the way that he hits the poses more aesthetic. Meanwhile, back in 2016, even the runner-up at the 2016 Mr. Olympia, there was not a huge gap between them and the normal bodybuilders, so to speak, and that is also perfectly evident if we move on from the 2016 Mr. Olympia winner, Danny Hester. And in my opinion, Danny Hester, he is a good bodybuilder. You can see that he is grainy and quite peeled. But when it comes to having a classical look, an aesthetic look, not even once, guys, not even once. In fact, even at that time, he was an older gentleman and he also had more of that worn out, grainy look, which in my opinion is not ideal for the classic physique division. He was also quite a shorter man, quite stocky, so there is that. Obviously his waistline, while not wide, especially compared to many of the bloated mass monsters of the open bodybuilding division at that time. Still not ideal, guys, still not ideal. And if we move on to this man right here, the current Miss Olympia, I do not even think that I need to say anything here. The very best classic physique competitor of all time, and comparing him to Danny Hester, it's just not even close. When it comes to open bodybuilding standards, you can even make a case for Danny Hester. Quite honestly, if you go through the poses, Danny Hester, not a bad open bodybuilder at all. So pretty much if you use the old classic physique standards, you can even say that Danny Hester would be beating Chris Bumstead, because in a normal bodybuilding show, you look more at graininess, muscularity, stuff of that, and you don't look that much on when it comes to structure, aesthetics, flow, stuff like that. So I'm quite glad that the standards of the classic physique division have changed, because if you look at Chris Bumstead even back in the day, this is him from the 2016, I don't remember what that show was called, but from a 2016 show, and he actually lost to, believe it or not, Darren Charles, the 5th place guy from the 2016 Mr. Olympia at the show, and another guy who also was at the show and also lost to Darren Charles, Terence Ruffin, believe it or not. Were they that much worse back in 2016? Of course, they have made major improvements since then, but still, guys, they were still quite good. So it just goes to show that, yes, the competitors, they have indeed gotten better, but the main change to the classic physique division is what is being judged. Finally, I also wanted to leave you guys with these two amazing physiques here, because while I do think that the modern day classic physique division is absolutely amazing, I think that they still need to perhaps increase the weight cap just a bit and also focus more on proportions and less on quad development, because in my opinion, these two guys are pretty much the peak when it comes to having a classic physique. And I know that you shouldn't really compare the golden era of bodybuilding to modern day classic physique division competitor, especially because the guys back in the day did not have a weight cap, but would pretty much interest in the classic physique division increase if more guys look like this? I think that they would. And I think that a lot of modern day classic physique division guys are either top heavy or bottom heavy. For the most part, they are more bottom heavy most often. And I think that that sort of throws off the aesthetics. But overall, that is pretty much it. I just wanted to show how the classic physique division has evolved, mostly in a positive manner. And hopefully we will see that continue. Pretty much all classic physique division guys that are placing near or at the top today, they are quite aesthetic. They have a small waistline and a good structure. That was it, guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you lovely, beautiful ladies and gentlemen later.